All right, everyone. So welcome to PURC's first Next Practices Live. We're really excited to have each of you with us, and especially excited to have our guest for this webinar, David Cox. We wanted to talk with him about how governments and in his case, telecom operators, we'll look at some others as well down the road, how they're partnering together and how they're working through the pandemic. It's our opinion that no one has the right answers here, that all of us are just trying things and trying to learn. So we thought maybe the best thing that we could do was give a broad platform for lots of sharing of information. We're really excited to have David. As Rebecca mentioned just a few moments ago, if you have questions you'd like to ask, please be sure to put them in the chat feature. We may not get to all your questions. If we don't, then we will hold those for future discussions. We'll find some way to engage in that content. Let's just jump right into it. David, as most of you know from the information we've sent out, is the chairman of CANTO. That's the organization for Caribbean telecom operators, government ministries, regulators, etc., all those who are involved in telecommunications in the Caribbean. He's also director of regulatory affairs for cable and wireless. And we're really excited to have him. He's one of our normal faculty for our 2-week course that we teach twice a year. So David, thank you for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure to be on with you, Mark. I just want to say congratulations to PURC, always thinking out of the box, always maintaining an excellent contact and dialogue with its former students, as it were. And I just think that this is an excellent idea. So I'm really chuffed, very, very happy to be invited by you, and I'm looking forward to it. I also want to say, before I forget, to everyone to, just please keep safe. Please practice social distancing, stay home if you can do that. Let's all make sure that everybody on this call is going to be around for another call later this year.
All right, very good. That's a great point. Thank you. So let's just jump right into it, David. You're working at several places around the Caribbean. You have responsibilities that are fairly broad. Your company has responsibilities across the globe. I was just wondering, what are you seeing? How are governments and operators forming partnerships? How are they working together to deal with the pandemic?
We're an absolutely critical industry for governments right now, and we're partnering with governments in a number of ways. First of all, I think everyone here probably realizes that the telecoms industry is absolutely critical to governments for information. We provide the networks over which a number of our citizens are getting the key information they need about the virus and what to do. And that, to a certain extent, is perhaps the reason that we have a better chance than any at any point in history for us to contain this outbreak, this pandemic, simply because the ubiquity of information is unprecedented. So this is an unprecedented situation, but the tools to fight the virus are available, and that's being done over our networks. We're a key industry as well for people to stay home and to work from home. And we're partnering with governments in very specific ways to ensure that we provide the best possible services and support. And I'm not talking about my company alone, but the telecoms operators in the United States, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in this hemisphere, and I'm sure across the world, are working extremely hard to make sure that people can stay connected. And that's a crucial tool right now. And of course, to support that, telecoms operators are agreeing with governments to do a number of things really that helps enable that for people to make it easier. So, some of the things that we're doing is across the globe, the telecoms operators are allowing people to have access to certain websites, at zero cost. We're zero rating websites. We're providing toll-free numbers to governments for emergency lines. We've seen examples of telecoms operators giving or boosting, residential broadband services to make sure people have the best speeds available. And we're doing a range of things to ensure that customers can stay connected. A key area in which we're partnering with government as well as in education. Lots of young people who are at the moment who are at home, who can't go to who can't go to any schools, and so we're providing key support in two areas. I would say I know of a number of telecoms operators that are trying to roll out some specific services to ensure that teachers can stay connected to students, and beyond that, of course, we're a key. Our networks help parents who have to work from home to make sure that when studies are over, children have access to entertainment to keep them occupied when they can't go outside. There are other things that we're doing, but I'm conscious of the time. I think the bottom line is that if you look at whether it's the United States, the Caribbean, or Latin America, telecoms operators are reaching out to governments to understand their needs and are working with them on a case-by-case basis. And there are several examples of that.
Okay, thanks, David. So you've mentioned already, so maybe all this is answered, ways that you're taking care of customers. You've not mentioned how you're taking care of your employees. Is there anything that you would add in those spaces to what you've already said?
Yeah, for customers, we're also doing an incredible amount. I think as a whole, the telecoms industry is focused on keeping people connected through this crisis. I talked about what we were doing for customers in the context of our partnership with government. To make a simple point, which is that although governments are coming to us and saying, "Look, we need your help. We want you to assist us in this way or that way," half of that conversation between industry and government is about, can you take care of your customers during this time? Can you take some extra special steps for your customers during this time? Because we need people to stay home. So that's a key partnership there. But with respect to our customers, we're really doing some amazing things. I know there are several telecoms operators that are looking at various ways to connect people who haven't been connected before, where their networks are available, but we are aware that people just don't have services. We are radically reorganizing and rethinking our approaches to providing services to those affected communities to make sure that at this critical time, everybody who wants a connection can get a connection, and people who may not realize they need a connection have a connection. And that's going to take some, and the approaches to that vary from region to region, country to country. But the bottom line is it's a key initiative that we're taking to make sure customers are connected. I'm also aware that as operators, we're doing what we can for those customers who are affected by the virus or the pandemic in some way, who've lost their jobs. We're thinking about new ways and different ways in which we can, again, make sure that those customers stay connected. And you're aware of the initiative, championed by the FCC to make sure that keep Americans connected. There's some version of that in all parts of the globe, and operators are implementing or taking different approaches to that based on their own circumstances. But the bottom line is that we're trying to make sure that customers have some access while this pandemic is going on. Now, with respect to employees, we have a very particular responsibility here. The key thing is our networks are critical at this time. It's critical to keep people connected, and it's critical that they keep operating. So we need to keep employees engaged. We need to keep employees paid. We need to keep employees and technicians in particular working on the network to make sure that the network doesn't topple over. We're seeing, for example, unprecedented and incredible demand on the networks during this time. And that means we have an even heavier responsibility to keep the networks working optimally than before. So that means we need to keep our technicians going out, but we need to protect them. And so there's a moral issue and a public health issue that arises. How do we not allow our technicians to become a source of spread? How do we protect our employees? So again, we're reaching out to things like unions to ask for their cooperation with us at this time to make sure that we can keep people working. We're giving them special equipment to make sure that they're protected. We're adopting protocols to ask whether or not there are any quarantine houses, zones, people, so that there are certain areas that we simply can't go because of the quarantine. And with respect to customers, we're trying to keep our stores open. I think that, when I say we, I think as an industry, I'm saying that as an industry, because again, we're an essential service for people. So people need to be able to have access on a case-by-case basis to our stores. And the specific policy on that varies from operator to operator and region to region. The bottom line is we're doing what we can. So a lot of operators are just reducing the number of people who can enter the store at any one time so that people can be socially distant from each other in the store. So we're not allowing large crowds into stores. We're giving employees special equipment to make sure that they can protect themselves, masks, etc. And sometimes the range of services or the number of hours available for customers to do business in our stores may be reduced. So we're taking a range of measures as an industry and trying to be as responsible as possible during what really is, and I know this, Mark, is a cliche, but it bears repeating that it is an unprecedented situation. It is an unprecedented crisis.
Okay, great. Thank you for all of that. So I want to remind people, if they have questions, enter them into the chat box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. I have a couple more questions for you, David, that are really kind of follow-ons to some things you just said. So you talked about that different companies are trying different things in different areas, countries are varying. How are you within a company sharing information on, we're trying this here, we're trying that there, here's what we're learning? How does that work? And now, is there discussion across companies as well, so people can figure out what's working where and maybe why?
Yeah, so you've hit upon one of the key things that we are going to be heavily reliant on as an industry in the coming months, which is identifying best practices. As you've eloquently said in our previous conversations, typically the past is the best sort of predictor of the future. The past helps you to understand how to deal with the lessons you learned in the past help you to understand how to deal with a problem today. The problem is we have never actually dealt with the situation we're dealing with today. So it's a process of learning. It's a process of trial and error. And one of the best ways that we can avoid problems is by sharing information. And so internally, I can tell you that in my own company, we've got several subsidiaries across the Caribbean, Latin America, and the United States, and we're constantly talking to ensure that we're sharing best practices on what we're doing for customers, what we can do to protect employees, how we can partner with governments. And once something works, once we've come up with an idea that we can implement, we simply farm that idea or spread that idea to some of the subsidiaries, some of the business, and try to make sure that it's implemented there. So if it's, for example, things like coming up with unique solutions on how to continue studying at home, and we've come up with some very unique proposals in one market, we try to spread that across the region. If in Panama, for example, there's some excellent proposals there about how to support customers who have never had our services before or are rural areas. We will try to implement that elsewhere. If in Chile we have some proposals on things that the government is asking for and we can meet that need, and it's something that's absolutely workable, we're going to try to roll that out across the business. So it's a key moment for collaboration. And of course, there's a huge amount of information available. We're looking at what other companies are doing. AT&T put out a very good statement on what it was going to do during the crisis. We looked at, I think, other companies have put out 5-point plans. And so any good idea or any idea is a good idea that we can take and run with. Okay. So collaboration is really important for us right now.
All right, very good. So there's something I wanted to follow up on, and Ram from Nepal has followed up on it as well. and that is when you are your technicians are going out in the field and they have to think about what kind of area am I stepping into? Is it you know, is there coronavirus here or not? Is it quarantined or not? How is that kind of information shared so that people know what kind of risks are being taken so they can help manage those?
Yeah, so we will sort of do a pre-check of every house before a technician has to go to that particular house. In some countries, in Jamaica, for example, there are communities, actually entire communities, where the government has imposed a quarantine. I'm aware of 2 so far that happened last week, and of course, for those areas where the government has quarantined, the entire community, our technicians just can't go. So we rely to some extent on government, but then otherwise, what we will do is that our call center will, if someone reports a fault or we have a problem, we will try to get in touch with those households to try to find out, is anybody sick? Try to determine whether or not anyone has recently traveled, and ask a series of questions. And then, of course, we have special procedures for technicians about washing hands, wearing certain sorts of protective clothing, protective equipment, and certain protocols for when they leave the premises, even when they go to a premises where people say, no, there's no one sick here, or there's no one self-isolating or in quarantine here. So there are some steps that you can take. And of course, the key thing is, just to make sure that your technicians are provided with the best possible equipment and are trained on the safety measures. So training, education is critically important right now to make sure people understand that they have a personal responsibility as well as a public responsibility, of course.
All right, thank you. Lisa Edgar, one of our professors here, a former regulator from here in Florida, whom I think you know, she's asked the question about supply chain issues, and this must be particularly a challenge for small economies. Talk to us about that. Are you running into any of those? If so, what are you trying to do?
Yeah, so the quick answer is not yet, but this will become a problem the longer this goes on. And how to crack that is really going to be a very, very difficult a problem. To be honest with you, I don't know what the answer is on the supply chain side. But in the interim, what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that we're reaching out to all of our vendors, all of our suppliers. We're trying to understand what their own limitations are early. And that's something that's critically important, being proactive, so that we can plan and anticipate. So this means, literally daily calls internally to try to understand, where the potential bottlenecks could be, and then try to identify alternatives or alternative supplies. It really requires imposing a very special discipline internally to try to deal with this situation.
Okay. We have another question, and it relates to something you'd already talked about as well, and that is trying to get everyone connected that wants to be connected. Tell us a little bit more about how that works, but in particular, if someone needs to be connected, and in part because maybe they're in quarantine or there's some health issue there, how do you coordinate with any government officials, government health officials, to make sure that the digital services are there to help the people who need them the most?
We're in a number of cases, we're in direct communication with our governments. So they are actually proactively reaching out to us and saying, look, we have concerns about, customers or citizens in a particular area. Can you assist us? What is available? We have people who are unconnected or don't have services, but who are interested. What can you do? So we're in a constant dialogue with our governments, and as I say, that we're trying to do this as an industry. I'm talking about not any one particular area, but as an industry, I think we're trying to do this in a number of ways. In some countries, for example, what we're doing is we're going back to the drawing board on, how do we design our packages? What sort of services can we provide to people who are, unconnected or who are underserved for the moment, that is going to be compelling enough to get them to take the service on. So in some respects, it means that we radically rethink the way the service, how we've designed the service, whether it's a residential broadband package or a fixed line package, whatever it is. In other circumstances, what it means is we may have customers who are already connected, and then we have to think about how we're going to keep them connected long term. Perhaps the answer there, and some operators there, what they're doing is they're looking at, again, perhaps thinking of developing a lifeline type of package in which the customer can continue to access the services, but at reduced capacity, as it were. So there are a myriad of ways in which we're trying to crack the problem. But I think what's key is that we're in constant dialogue with our stakeholders and our governments in particular. And governments are not shy about asking us. They're coming to us directly and they're saying, every day, we need help here. We want you to do this. Can you do this? Or what solutions can you offer here to crack this problem? And I mean, this can get as specific as a government coming to say, we have a quarantine zone in a particular area. We want a high-speed broadband connection to this quarantine zone to help encourage people to stay there and to make them as comfortable as possible. Can you do this for us for a period of time at no cost? And we're seeing these types of requests coming in on a daily basis.
Okay. So one of the questions that's come up as well in the chat box is the relationship between the government and the operators when the operator is privately held. It's in some cases, if the government owns the operator, you can simply command and control and tell them what to do. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not with the privately held operators. Can you tell us anything about that relationship? Because one of the things you've talked about is this issue of always being adaptable. Government regulation may be really good for that, may not. How do you manage that relationship with the government when it wants to act and maybe you have a different idea in mind?
Well, look, I think all of these companies, all of us as operators recognize that this is a peculiar time in our history. It's a peculiar time for us as companies. It's a peculiar time for our customers. And, as far as I can see, there's an overwhelming desire on the behalf of these companies to be as constructive as possible and to work in as much partnership as possible with key stakeholders like government as we possibly can. Now, there are some things we simply can't do. For example, a government may come to us and say, we want you to take this particular action, and we simply can't do that. One of the concerns that we've had, for example, in that regard is just, governments wanting to impose curfews or take action and leave us out as an essential service. And we've had to go back to governments in some cases and say, look, we need to have the technicians out there. We need to have technicians working. We need to keep our stores open because people need to be connected. It's just essential right now. And we can't do that unless we can take certain actions. So you need to change the law. You need to change your decree or change the way you are defining us. And sometimes government may simply ask us to do some things which just don't make sense for us financially at this time or just for our employees. One of the things that people need to understand is that during this crisis, connectivity it is essential for you and your survival. It may be essential for your survival. It may be essential for you to continue to be able to work and be productive. But that means for us, we have a responsibility to keep our employees paid for as long as we can, because we simply need to keep the networks up and running. And that means, of course, that there are certain things that we can't do if we want to make sure we don't lay off people now or lay off people early. And so if we have to do that, there are some compromises that have to be made. But thus far, it means that we're dialoguing with governments to help them understand what our constraints are, and we're trying to address their concerns to the best of our ability without compromising our need for continuity, not for our own sakes, not just for our own sakes, but simply because we know and the government recognizes they need to have us operational for the long haul.
Yeah, and we've had a couple of questions on financial impacts and such. I think we'll have to hold that for another time because that is a critical issue, because at the other end of this, whenever that might be, we want healthy, thriving economies, healthy, thriving companies, because that's how you get service in people's hands. That's how people have jobs. We're about out of time. I just want to ask one more question. And this has to do with your feedback into the government's knowledge base, if you will. And answer it whichever way you would like. We do see some situations where telecom operators are providing telecom data, usage data to the government so it can better understand, where people are doing particular things, where people even are in some countries. But then there's also, you've been in particular areas, your employees have seen things, and that kind of feedback to the government as well. It's critical for information to flow, but there are also privacy issues, and you want to be very, very accurate in the information you give. You want it to be quality information. How are companies dealing with those issues?
Yeah, so this is a tough one because we are getting requests regularly from governments to assist them with providing, some type of information, which in normal circumstances one might regard as potentially breaching, privacy concerns. So that is a sensitive area that we need to manage. And so what we try to do is, and this is relevant to your previous question, which is about, we're trying at the moment to make sure that we always try to make sure we have good relationships with our governments because they provide our licenses, they provide our spectrum. But we're trying to make sure that the lines of communication are open, and we're trying to help them understand what our constraints are. We're explaining to them what they need to do to help us help them. So with respect to the provision of certain types of customer information, we will work with the government. We will help explain to them what the constraints are on us, and then push the government to take the right steps to the right steps to enable us to do that in a way that doesn't compromise our customers' privacy, that doesn't compromise the rule of law. So and the governments are by and large happy to do that once they recognize it's a concern, and once they recognize that it's necessary. Now that might seem a little strange. I'll end quickly on this point. You're saying that the government might not know that, but you need to understand governments are under tremendous pressure at the moment. Things are extremely fluid. They need to make decisions very quickly, and sometimes they're making requests, in a reflexive way because they need the information as a matter of urgency. So we're trying not to be a roadblock, but at the same time, we want to take a constructive approach that's not going to violate some core principles right now. And that's key in this area, in this time of crisis. You don't want to make some decisions either on the commercial side, on the public policy side, or on the ethical side that then compromise you so much that it's impossible to recover later on.
Yeah. All right. Well, David, we're out of time. I want to respect the time boundaries we set. Thank you so much for everything that you've offered. I just want to emphasize the theme that was throughout your conversation, and that I think is true as well, is that none of us have the right answer here. We're all taking steps. We're all trying things. That's why we starting this series called Next Practices, because there isn't a best practice at this moment. We've not been down this road before. All we know is what we can try next. And the best learning from the next practice is what you share with others. So I really appreciate your taking the time to do this. To our